Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on the bottom of the Mem Tet, Amud Bet, 2 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is dedicated as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Rachel bat Edna, Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, Michael ben Nahid, Esther Bracha bat Chaya, Rabbi Avraham ben Tashgol, that should all have full recovery, Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. His Amud is also being learned as a Zchut for the Neshama of Jacqueline bat Avraham and Ardas, that should have an Aliyah. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Shea family, Dayan family, and Cohen families. This should be an ultimate Zchut for all of their mishpachot, Amen. So we are at the very tail end of Perek Lulav Arava, the 4th Perek of Masechet Succah, and the last thing that we had mentioned in the last Mishnah of the Perek was Kema'asehu bechol kach ma'asehu b'Shabbat, that just like you had Nisuch Hamayim on Yemot HaChol, you also had Nisuch Hamayim on Shabbat. The only difference is that when they would go to Shiloach and would bring this Memayan, right, Mimayaneh Yeshua, Ushafte Mayim B'Sazon, they couldn't carry it because Averav Hotza'ah on Shabbat. So how would they handle the fact that they needed the water and the water could not be brought? So you will ask, well, let them just bring it from before Shabbat. What's the problem? Now, they would do that. They would bring water from before Shabbat, but they had to bring it, said the Mishnah, in a kli that was not a kli sharet. They couldn't bring it in a regular vessel of the Beit HaMikdash. They had to specifically bring it in a kli that was not kadosh, a kli that was not designated yet, a kli that was not considered kli sharet yet. Why not, is what the Gemara is going to discuss. Why can't you just bring this golden, beautiful vessel, be one of the kli sharet of the Beit HaMikdash, bring it from beforehand, leave it there, and use it tomorrow morning on Shabbat morning? Says the Gemara, Ve'amai, naiti be'mekudeshet. Let us bring the water in a kli that's mekudash already, that's been sanctified for the service of the Beit HaMikdash. Amar Zeiri. Zeiri says, because kasavar en shiur lemayim v'chli sharet mekadeshin shelo midat. There are 2 assumptions over here to be had. One, that there is no shiur lemala for nisuch hamayim. Now, the minimum, we said, is 3 login, or according to Rabbi Yehuda, log echad. But that's the minimum. If you bring 3.5, hazaku baruch, kol hamarbe areze meshubach. There's no shiur lemala. You have to bring minimum of 3 login. So if you assume that there's no shiur lemala, then the kli that you use, even if you put more water in it, still will be mekadesh the water inside. Because if you assume that only the shiur that is specified for the mitzvah needs to be brought, nothing more. In other words, you cannot bring more water than 3 logim. You remember before we had one pshat why you can't have with water that is left open, because maybe a snake put some venom inside and now it's imbalance of the shiur that you have to bring, right? Because it has to be exactly specified shiur of 3 logim. Now, if you say it has to be specified, that if you put 3.5 logim, that it never becomes kadosh, because it's not the shiur that's ra'ui for the mitzvah. It has to be exact amount for it to become kadosh. So says Zeiri, over here, our Tana holds that you have no shiur lemala. It doesn't have to be specifically 3. It could be 3.5. It could be 3.25. As long as it's more than 3. So therefore, even if you put more than 3 logim, you obviously can't put less than 3 logim, because you need a minimum amount for Nisu Chamayim. So you'll say, well, let's bring some more. And if you bring some more, then the Kli Sharet is not going to be Mekadesh, is not going to sanctify the water because it's not the Shi'ur that you need. Right? Then you would be set to go. Says Ziri, that's why we assume that our Tana, our Mishnah holds, En Shi'ur Lemala. That whatever water you bring is good. Therefore, if you put it now in a Kli Sharet and it's 3.5, the Kli Sharet is going to be Mekadesh, the Kli, the water. And therefore you can't do that. Right? You can't bring just more water and leave it overnight. Because if you had to be specific about 3, the easiest way out would be bring 3.5, and it's not going to be Mekadesh, because there's more. So says Iri, that's not an option. Our Tana holds you cannot bring water from before, because even more than Shiur still is good, and it will be Mekadesh. That's one assumption. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, on top of that, the Kli Sharet Mekadeshin Shelo Midat. And if you use Kli Sharet for something, it becomes a Mekudash even without you having a specific dot. Just the fact that you put it there in Kli Sharet, it's Mekadesh. Now what's the problem with this, by the way? If something becomes Mekudash in Kli Sharet, it becomes Pasul Belina. Overnight makes it Pasul. If something didn't become Kadosh, so just stam water, didn't become Kadosh. So water doesn't become Pasul. But if you put it in Kli Sharet and it becomes now holy water that stays overnight, Pasul. Anything that becomes Kadosh overnight, Pasul. We mentioned this before, therefore the Kiyor, which was the vessel that they used for the water of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, obviously was Nimshach B'Shemen HaMishcha, right? They sanctified the Kiyor with Shemen HaMishcha. It was considered one of the main Kilasharet in the Beit HaMikdash. So the water of the Kiyor, if they would just leave it there, overnight would become completely Pasul. How did they handle it? So we mentioned they had this like lever that every day, at the end of the day, when they were done with the Avodah of the Beit HaMikdash, they would hang this with the chains and lower the lever, and the entire Kiyor, the entire massive Kiyor, would sink into water of the well that was inside the Azara, and this way would not be Nifsal Belina. That's how they took care of that. But any Kli Sharet that is Mekadesh, the content within, will become Pasul overnight. So therefore, says the Gemara, well, can't be that this golden jug is Kli Sharet, because the water within it would become Pasul overnight. So you didn't gain anything by going Friday and skipping the Isur of Hotza'ah, because now the water is Pasul. You would tell me, do a little bit more measurement? Our Tana holds even more measurement is fine for Simchat Beit HaShoeva, for Nisu Chamayim. So that's not an Eitzah, that's not an answer. You would tell me, don't have in mind to be Mekadesh until later. Says the Mishnah, V'Kli Sharet Mekadeshin Shelo Midat. That's why the only Eitzah that you have is bring a vessel that's not a Kli Sharet. It's not Mekudeshet. You bring a jug of gold that has not been used, and that will answer your problem. So that's the first thing that the Mishnah says, which makes a lot of sense. It's very sensible. Says the Gemara, Ve'imaiti be'mekudeshet, if you will bring in a kli that's mekudash, ifsilu lehu belina, they will become pasul through the fact that they are staying overnight in a kli sharet, which would make them pasul, like the regular general rule of Kli Sharet. So that's the first answer of the Gemara in the name of Zeiri. Says the Gemara, Chizkiya Amar, Chizkiya said a different pshat. Kli Sharet en mekadeshin ela mida'at, that Kli Sharet, they make something that is in them kadosh only midat, only if you have that. And over here, you would have an etzah to bring it on Erev Shabbat in actual Kli Sharet. You don't need a new vessel. You could bring in an old Kli Sharet, just say, I don't want this to become Kadosh until tomorrow morning. Right? I don't want this to be Kadosh by mere fact of staying inside of it. I am making a Tanai, my mind is this should become Kadosh tomorrow. That would work. Technically, that would check all the required boxes. But says Chizkiah, there is a gezerah over here. Even though that technically speaking, that water would be fine, but gezerah shema yomru ledat nitkadeshu. People are going to look and say, whoa, you put it every time that you put something in Kli Sharet, you have that. So people will say, whoa, I didn't know that you could put in Kli Sharet and then use it tomorrow morning. They would think that even though that bedat nitkadeshu, still it would be kasher for Nisuch Hamayim, and hence they would deduce from that in their mind that something that stayed overnight is kasher for Nisuch Hamayim, and that's a problem. So that's the second pshat. Rabbi Yanai says even better. Rabbi Yanai says, I'll give you everything. Everything you want, and it still is a problem. Amar Rabbi Yanai, Amar Rabbi Zera, Afilu tema yesh shiur lemayim. Even if you tell me that yesh shiur lemayim, that means when we say 3 logim, means 3 logim exactly. You can't bring 3 logim and 1 ounce. If you would put 3 logim and 1 ounce, pasul. So therefore, the obvious, easiest answer would be bring a Kli Sharet, fill up 3 logim and half, and therefore this 3 logim and half, it will not become even kadosh. How would it become? It only would become kadosh. It's like a key. It has to fit all the dents and crevices. It has to meet all the requirements. If it's not exactly 3 logim, if it's a little less or a little more, that's not going to even become kadosh. Even if you want it to become kadosh, it's not going to become kadosh. So the easiest way would be just fill it up with 3.5 logim of water, and you're good to go. Says Rabbi Yanai, says Rabbi Zera. Afilu tema yesh shiur lemayim. That it's the shiur is very specific. The Kli Sharet and mekadeshin lamidat, and on top of it, I'll give you whatever you want. Even if you assume that Kli Sharet do not make something kadosh ela midat. So you have all of the things on your side that you filled it up with 3.5, so it's not going to become kadosh, and you had that I don't want this to become kadosh until tomorrow morning, still is a problem. Still is a gezerah. What's the gezerah now? The gezerah shema yomru lekiddush yadayim v'raglayim milan. In other words, if you tell me that 3 logim is specific, then when a person sees a 4-log jog that's filled to the brim, they're not going to think that this is for nisuch hamayim because it's 4 logim, and shiur is specific, right? So that's not a gezerah. There's no gezerah that, maybe people are going to think that you filled this up ledat. It's a different shiur. People knew this is a 3-log, this is a 4-log. But there's still a different gezerah. They may look at it and say, no, this is filled up for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And it stayed overnight, and it was ledat, and you see it's kasher, they're using it for nisuch hamayim. And they're going to make a mistake. Now, this gezerah has to be something that is actually practical, right? So that's what we said. If it's a 4-log water jog, then there's no chashash that an onlooker will look and say, this is for nisuch hamayim. Because they will know, nisuch hamayim is 3 logim only. If you say that the Tana holds, the halacha is that the shiur of 3 logim is specific, so then 4 logim, people are not going to look and say, this was filled up for nisuch hamayim. The gezerah of Chazal is very specific. It has to be actually practical. And that would not be practical. So therefore, that's not the gezerah according to Rabbi Zera. You know what's the gezerah? They're going to look at this 4 logim and say, this was filled up for nisuch, not for nisuch hamayim, but for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Because kiddush, Rashi, it's a beautiful Rashi here, asks the obvious question. Says Rashi, well, why would they think that you're going to use a golden jug of water for nisuch yadayim, for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? Normally speaking, Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is from the Kior. You have this massive basin of water for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Why would you not leave the basin and go to a jug that's gold? We didn't have that for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, right? So how in the world, if you're being practical, how would they have this mindset that this is used for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? We just mentioned that even a shiur would take away the gezerah. If it's a little more, and the shiur is specifically has to be 3 logim, if the jog is 4, nobody's going to think that this was filled up for Nisuch HaMayim. So how says Rashi, if you remember in Masechet Yuma, in Daf Memvav, we had a Mishnah that once a year, according to Chachamim, Kohen Gadol would actually use a gold jug of water for Nisuch, for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, right? And that's on Yom Kippur. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, would be other days of the year as well for Kohen Gadol, but at least on Yom Kippur, according to Chachamim, you would have the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim of the Kohen Gadol from a golden vessel. And Chag HaSukkot comes right after Yom Kippur. So people would think, oh, you know what happened? 5 days ago, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur had to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim from this golden jug. So they had some leftovers, and it's the Shiraim of the Rebbe. We're going to use it for Nisuch HaMayim. And that for sure was overnight 5 times. It was a few days overnight. So they would say, oh, you could see from here that Nisuch HaMayim could be overnight as well, and it's not pasul. That's the gezerah. When you see a golden jug of water that was kept overnight for Nisuch HaMayim, people will look at it and say, oh, this is the jug of the Kohen Gadol. It was filled for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim on Yom Kippur and stayed overnight 5 days, and it still is kasher. So you see, you don't need a problem. You don't have a problem with overnight, for that's the gezerah. So says Rabbi Zera, I don't care how you slice the halacha, even if you think that the shiur of 3 logim is very specific, it can't be more. And you hold also, on top of that, that the klei sharet only makes some things kadosh when you have in mind. So therefore, you could definitely say when you draw the water, I want this to become kadosh only tomorrow morning, because you need that. And on top of it, you could fill up a little bit more than 3 logim, and it won't become kadosh altogether. Still will be a problem, because people is gezerah. People will look at this jog overnight and say, this was overnight from Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and hence it has to be a kli chadash. You bring a kli that's not kli sharet, it has not been mekudash. This way you prevent people from thinking that something could stay in kli sharet overnight and still be kasher. Right? So it's a extended gezerah. So says the Gemara. The next piece, the last piece of the Mishnah was that if this jog that you brought on Friday, right? So you brought it from Friday before because you wanted to prevent yourself from carrying on Shabbat. So you put it there, and then someone came and by mistake they got excited and they knocked it off, and it poured. Or it was not covered; it was left uncovered overnight. Then it's pasul. So why is it pasul? Ve'amai. Why is it pasul? So we mentioned in the Mishnah that the reason is because maybe a snake came and drank from this water, and through the process of drinking, left some of its venom inside the water. Now, the Gemara says, okay, fine, but that we can fix that. Says the Gemara, le'aver b'mesanenet. You could sift it and take out the venom, because the venom does not get mixed with the water. Consistency of the venom is such that when in water it stays together by itself, floating on top. You may not be able to see it, but it's not, the particles don't get mixed with water. So if you have a very fine mesanenet sifter, you gently could pour this through a mesanenet, and it will kind of like keep up the venom, and the water would be safe. So why don't we do that? Says the Gemara, Lema matnitin de lo Rabbi Nechemia. This is a shita of Rabbi Nechemia that's well known. What did Rabbi Nechemia say in the Braita? The Tanya mesanenet yesh bo mishum gilui, that even if you have mesanenet, it has, and you put wine on top of the mesanenet, the wine that you produce still has a problem of gilui. That if it was left open without supervision, now it's going to be dangerous, sakana, to eat from it, because, to drink from it, because of the venom that possibly could be there. Amar Rabbi Nechemia, Ematai bizman shatachtona megule. Rabbi Nechemia said, no, only the only time that's a problem is when the bottom barrel is open. In other words, Rashi explains, this is a type of wine that they would make. They wanted the wine to smell good, to taste good. So they would sift it through things that are good tasting and good smelling. They would have the top barrel and the bottom barrel with the mesanenet. They would pour the wine on top, right? And they would be sifted through these material, these spices and so on, and it would pour to the bottom container a beautiful wine. So you put the wine on top, and the top container is open. Says the Gemara, it's a problem of gilui, because if the snake went there and did his thing, it's going to be bad. Rabbi Nechemia says no. It's only going to be a problem if the bottom one is also exposed. That means the sifter is not attached to the top of the bottom barrel. But if it is, then there's no snake that could go in to the bottom one, and the top one is being sifted. So even if there is some venom in the top one, when it gently gets sifted, it gets separated from the wine itself. It stays on top, and the wine on the bottom barrel you could drink from. There's no issue of danger, of sakana, of the venom. This is the shita of Rabbi Nechemia. So says the Gemara, let's suggest that our Mishnah is not Rabbi Nechemia, because our Mishnah says it's not good. If it was left open overnight, it's not, which indicates that he can't fix it even with sifting it through a mesanenet. So let's suggest that's not Rabbi Nechemia. One says, what do you mean? Of course it could be Rabbi Nechemia. Because we're not talking about danger over here, we're talking about a korban. Let's read the Gemara. Says the Gemara, אבל בזמן שהתחתונה מכוסה, אף על פי שהעליונה מגולה, אין בה משום גילוי. Rabbi Nechemia holds that so long as the bottom barrel is covered, you're good to go, because the mesanenet would sift through any venom possible. מפני שארס נחש, because the venom of a snake, דומה לספוג, it's like a sponge. It sticks together and it floats on top of the water. סף ועומד במקומו. It floats and sticks together. It does not get, the consistency is such that it does not get mixed with the water, and therefore you can sift it out. So says the Gemara, no, afilu tema Rabbi Nechemia. It could even, our Mishnah could even be Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia would tell you that you could sift it and drink it, no problem. But here we're not talking about the issue of sakana. We're not talking about the issue of danger, of venom. We're talking about the issue of kavod. Emor de Amar Nechemia lehediot. For a regular fellow, for a regular commoner, you could sift it and give it to him, Rabbi Nechemia would say, and it will be safe. It will not die, nothing will happen. Aval legavoah, bringing a korban like that? You want to bring a korban to Hashem in that way? Mi Amar, would he ever say such a thing? Ve'letle, doesn't he hold Rabbi Nechemia, hakriveu na lefechatecha. The pasuk says so beautifully, Malachi, bring it. There, the pasuk is actually complaining. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is complaining that Jews were bringing korbanot that were not the high quality korbanot. They would bring like the broken leg, blemish, like lower quality, like the old mistake of Cain, right? Old mistake of Cain. We spoke about this. Like Cain was milashon kinyan. He was the biggest innovator. He was the biggest entrepreneur in the world ever. He created the concept of civilization, society, living in packs, ayarot. He's the one that created the concepts that we deal with up to today. He's the one that created the concept of korban. Hevel just kind of copied the concept. But he also felt that, if I'm burning something, that it's not, the main thing is that I'm giving something to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, showing that, I care about korban, but who cares if it's going to be burning anyway, so who cares about the quality? Right? Very practical, economical, preferences of how you're going to be running your thing. That's what Cain was. If you're bringing something to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it has to be with kavod. You can't just bring anything. So he brought Michel Vehen. He brought the best of the best, right? So this is the same thing. Hashem says, if you bringing shavur, if you bring a lame animal, if you bring an iver, a blind animal, a blemished animal, that's hayirtzecha. He says that's good. That's kavod for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hakliveu na lefechatecha. Please bring such a gift to your governor, to your important people. Hayirtzecha, is he going to be happy with that gift? Hayisa panecha, will he even look at you? So that's the problem. Says Reb Nehemiah, of course you could give a sifted and give it to a person to eat, to drink, that would be fine, but you can't bring that as a korban. A wine, a water in this case, that has safek, maybe it had some venom, you cannot use it for a korban, for nisuch hamayim. It has to be prevented to begin with from any chance of having venom. Now, this Fatimet says, wait a second, why can't you do the following? Sift it and see if you get any venom on top of the sifter. And if you didn't, so then it comes out that you never had it. So then there's no problem, right? So it says, it's not that you could see it. The venom is not something that you always, because you even do that. Sometimes it's yellow and it's clear and you can see. Sometimes it's not. It could be sifted, but you can't always visibly see it. So therefore, that's not an option. And says the Gemara in that line that something that you bring for HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be the best of the best. You don't take any chances with bringing something that is not a high quality. And with that, Hadran Alach, Lulav Arava, we finish the fourth perek and we start the fascinating last perek, last few pages of Masechet Succah that is going to speak about Simchat Bet HaShoeva. Right? We spoke about the mitzvot of Chag, of Lulav and Arava and Nisuch HaMayim, which is beautiful. Now we're going to actually focus our attention on Simchat Bet HaShoeva, which the Gemara is going to say, Misha lo ra'as Simchat Bet HaShoeva, lo ra'as Simcha miyamav. If you didn't experience Simchat Bet HaShoeva, you don't know what Simcha means in your life. Right? That's something fascinating. The Gemara is going to actually now focus on that in the next few pages, basically being the last perek, last few pages of Masechet Succah. It's going to start the Mishnah at least, Chalil, Chamisha v'Shisha. The mitzvah of the flute, the instruments that would be played, musical instruments that would be played during the Simchat Bet HaShoeva. Again, we started the previous perek in the Mishnayot that we had. Okay, how many days do you have Sukkah? How many days do you have the mitzvah of Lulav, Arava? Right? We said how many days of each one of them. Some of them were 6, some of them were 7, some of them were 8. And now is the mitzvah of Chalil, the mitzvah of the instruments that were played in the Bet HaMikdash in the process of Simchat Bet HaShoeva, Chamisha v'Shisha. Sometimes it's going to be 5 days. Sometimes it's going to be 6 days. Zeu hechalil shel bet hashoeva. This would be the musical instruments, the flutes and so on, that would be used in Simchat Bet HaShoeva. She'eno doche lo et Shabbat velo et Yom Tov. That would not push away not Shabbat and not Yom Tov. In other words, we have an issue of playing instruments on Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? Therefore, by the way, the Shulchan Aruch says that this is something that becomes partially a machloket between the Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. In Siman Shin Lametet, Seif Gimel, in Orach Chaim, that it's based on a Mishnah in Masechet Betzah, En Meraktin Ven Metapchin, right? Kaf al Yarich, that you don't dance, you don't, clap, you play music even on your thighs, certainly with instrument. You cannot do. That's a prohibition on Shabbat because Shema Yetaken Kleshir. Maybe you're going to play instrument. If you do that, then next thing is you gotta play instrument, and when you play instrument, something's gonna break and you're gonna fix it, and that's gonna be bad news, right? So playing the musics of Simchat B'Tashoeva, which is not part of the Avodah. If it would be part of the Avodah, then it would be Dochel Shabbat, right? These Leviim, they are still operating on Shabbat and Yom Tov with their instruments and everything by the bringing of the. But this is Simchat B'Tashoeva. In Simchat B'Tashoeva aspect of it is not Dochel Shabbat and it's not Dochel Yom Tov. So if it's not Dochel Shabbat and Yom Tov, so then what's going to be exactly the timeline? Well, it really depends. If Yom Tov Rishon of Chag HaSukkot falls to be on Shabbat, which it does sometimes, then in Eretz Yisrael, of course, you have only one day of Yom Tov. The whole Chag is 7 days, right? Minus the Shmini Atzeret. So on Shabbat and Yom Tov, the first day you can't do it. So how many days do you have left? 6 days. If the first Yom Tov is not on Shabbat, so then inevitably you're going to have a Shabbat Chol HaMoed. And if you have Shabbat Chol HaMoed, then on Yom Tov Rishon you can't play the flute, and on Shabbat Chol HaMoed you can't play the flute. So 7 minus 2, last time I checked, was 5, right? So therefore, you have 5 or 6 days that the Chalil would be played in Simchat B'Tashoeva, which really becomes the segue for the Gemara of discussing all of these things that we mentioned and leading into how this Simchat B'Tashoeva would operate, which Be'ezrat Hashem we will start and explain in the next shiur. Hazaku Baruch.